Just about everyone who comes in for couples counseling, when asked, why are you seeking counseling and what do you need help with? It seems like the universal answer is, we don't know how to communicate. So this seventh talk on how do we best understand God's design for relationships deals with the issue of communication. There are thousands of books and articles and things, blogs, and information about communication is everywhere. What I'm going to try to do is distill it down into a workable model. It might be a starting point for you. You might have ways of editing or taking some of it and reworking it. But we'll start with just a basic model of some of the things that need to happen in communication from what I've picked up over the years. And I'm borrowing the concept of validation from Sorensen's book, I Hear You. So I recommend that short little book, but it's hard, the concept of validation, which I'm going to use for one of the sections here. So this is called the LUV model of communication, the love model of communication. If you want to really enjoy it, you call it the love model. So what do we need? First of all, is we need to listen attentively. You'll hear things like active listening, attentive listening. It gets us out of the idea that listening is passive. Listening is actually very hard work if we do it well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how that works. But this is a focused, attentive listening that's needed. It's not being distracted by other things. The TV's on, the kids are here, and just it's here in front of me. Then we need to understand empathetically. And we need to really try to make that understanding connection of where you're coming from. Not what I'm interpreting, but what you're really trying to get communicated to me. And then we need to validate acceptingly. And that means that I may not always agree with you, but I always really do well to validate where you're coming from. That leads us to a connection that is safe, or to connect safely, which finally takes us to the place where we can love creatively. And that's where we want to land. Finding new ways to give and receive love and express it in our relationships. And so we see this progression through these 5 steps. And let's look at some of the premises of each one. Premise number 1 for listen attentively is that few people listen well. I would venture a guess that the people you have chosen as your very best friends are people who can listen well. They're not always the ones doing the talking, but there's some sort of reciprocity or balance between, okay, I've shared some of what's going on with me, let me hear what's going on with you. And I want to listen to your world. And there's this nice give and take. Those are the people we want to be around, good listeners. I find people coming into our counseling program, and you ask them, well, why did you come into counseling? And they say, well, all my life I've been told I'm easy to talk to. Or people just come to me with their problems. And a lot of times it's because they are good listeners. Sometimes I've joked with Sue, and I have this joke going on that, wow, that was a long conversation. What was happening? And sarcastically or tongue-in-cheek, one of us will say, well, we made the mistake of actually listening. And it's amazing what happens when you listen. People want to talk. So we want to be able to listen well. Premise 2, for understand empathetically, and I find that this one, of all 5 of the premises, is the one where people connect with the most. And that is, as soon as we think we understand what the other person's saying, we begin to formulate a response. So I listen long enough to get the gist of what you're saying, and then I begin formulating my response, which could be a better rebuttal, more evidence to prove that you're wrong, a better case from my point of view, and I'm already thinking about what I'm going to, and this is one of my pet peeves. If I'm in a group experience, whatever kind of group it is, it could be people talking, people praying, people sharing things, whatever the group is, one of my pet peeves is when someone stops, before they've basically even finished their last words, someone jumps in and starts talking or praying or doing whatever. That tells me right away that person was not listening to the person who just went or just shared. They were just counting down the seconds till they could jump in with their ideas. What I like to do is to encourage people, before you respond, take a few seconds, let whatever's said sink in. Give it some airtime, give it some breathing room, and then people feel like, wow, what I would say really means something. You'll see this even professionally with people in panels. There's no place to breathe from one person to the next. I often wonder how someone who's interviewed on one of these news shows, they barely get their last word out and say, thank you for coming, or thank you for being here, and they're off. The commentator, the facilitator's off. It's like, could you give them just like 2 seconds to let what they said just sit there for a minute before you move? Because it feels like what I just said wasn't very important because you didn't really care to listen to it. So I think if we can slow down a little bit, our minds tend to race sometimes, slow down and stay with the person until they're finished before we start building our rebuttal. Premise 3, we seldom validate because of real or perceived differences or inaccuracies. Why would I validate you when I don't think you're right? Well, I can still validate you even if I don't agree with you. In fact, I need to, because I want you to know that what you're sharing is important. It's important to me to hear your thoughts. And if I'm really listening well, I'm going to probably find at least something in there that has something of merit or important, or some kind of feedback that benefits me. And so I want to make sure that I don't just invalidate someone because they're coming from the wrong camp or the wrong school of thought or the wrong system, the wrong whatever. Welcome. Share your ideas. Let's have a meaningful dialogue. Wouldn't that be nice in our culture? People actually have meaningful dialogues. We don't have the influence ability anymore. Everyone's set in their camps. There's no, well, let me think about that. Well, that's a really interesting point. I appreciate you sharing that. I want to give that some consideration. I don't see it. Either you fit into my way of thinking, or you're no thanks. I don't validate anything. It's an all or nothing proposition. Premise 4, we flourish best when safely connected to others. We all crave connection. That's how we were made. We were made in the image of a triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Why would we be any different? If we're made in the image of a triune God, then we're made for connection. That's just, we're made in His image. What does that look like, to be made in His image? It means that I function best when I'm connected. I'm in a community. I'm with people who enjoy me. I enjoy them. We don't always agree, but we respect each other. And so we flourish best when safely connected. And remember in our last talk, we said that we always connect before we correct. Well, here, if I'm connected safely, then maybe the corrections that are needed are going to have a much better chance of being received and welcomed. So it all kind of ties together. And then finally, in premise 5, creative love is one of the most powerful forms of communication. Why is that? That means that when we're apart, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about ways to show you how special you are. I'm thinking about all the things that I'm grateful for in who you are as a person, and all the ways that you have loved me well, sacrificed for me, and just enriched my life. When I can find ways to communicate back how special that is, we don't have to be like world-class inventors or creators, but we need to be thinking about ways to express how we feel about those people that are special. And sometimes if we get it in a creative version of it, it sure means a lot, because it means we put in some extra time and thought and energy for it. And that feels good. So that's the first part. Now what I'd like to do with this is I'd like to break each one of these 5 boxes down in more specificity, if I could do that. All right, let's start with listening attentively. By definition, this is the gift of undivided attention. The gift of undivided attention. This means that there's nothing else going on that's more important than me wanting to hear you and what you have to say. This signifies a respect and genuine interest in another person. What's required is a careful listening for what's being said, which I'm going to call the content of what's being said, how it is said. This is the tone of voice and the nonverbal expressions. You know, Jesus made a very interesting statement at the end of sort of the last few days of his earthly ministry. And he said, I don't speak on my own. I speak what the Father tells me what to say and how to say it. I love that, and how to say it. I've just rushed by that for years until it jumped out at me. The Father's told me what to say, the content, and He's told me how to say it. So we're listening for the content, but we're also listening for how it's said, the nonverbals, the facial expressions. You've all heard the research that the majority of communication is not words, it's facial expressions and nonverbal expressions, tone of voice. That's where the real communication takes place. And so we're tuned into that, and we're paying attention to that as well. And then finally, I may be listening for what is not being said. Now that's a little trickier. But if I'm listening for what's not being said, I'm really paying attention. And sometimes that's the most important thing about the exchange. It may be that you've been talking around something, but you've never really answered the question. Or I've maybe asked you, well, how are you feeling about that? And you've told me this beautiful analysis about the situation, but you've not told me how you feel about it, or how it makes you feel, or how it's affecting you. And so I want to pay attention to what's not being said. It could be a lack of trust, or just not an ability to put it into words. So then we go to understand empathetically. By definition, this is the ability to catch the emotional overtones in what is said. It signifies a desire to know the whole person. I believe that people give hints or give clues or give little cracks in the door that if we're paying attention and trying to understand, we can get into their world and begin to see life from their perspective. Research is showing that this is a major factor in couples who have long-term fulfilling relationships. They have the ability to look at something from their partner's perspective. What a gift. Once again, I may not agree with it, but if I can see what you're seeing regarding this situation, there's a great probability that I'm going to respond to you differently. I'm going to, instead of trying to tell you what you're missing, I'm much more apt to connect with you in what you're seeing. And what a gift to feel like someone is understanding what I'm really trying to say. Maybe I'm not even finding the right words for it, but they're listening, they're understanding what I'm trying to get across. Looking at life, perspective taking, looking at life through someone else's lenses. What a gift, and what a great way to communicate you're important to me, that I want to go to that much effort to understand how you see the world. Validate acceptingly, by definition, the desire to accept, embrace, and learn from someone who sees the world or a specific situation differently than you. I think we could use some of that in today's culture. Our society needs a healthy dose of validating acceptingly. This signifies a humility that recognizes others have much to offer. And what's required is a freedom from always needing to be right. Sometimes you want to ask people, don't you get tired of always being right? It signifies a willingness to meet people where they are instead of imposing expectations for who they should become. Isn't that what Jesus did? Our culture, we meet people and tell them who they should be. Jesus met them where they were and loved on them first. It was a beautiful validation, a beautiful acceptance of, I hear your heart, I see where you're at. Now let's walk it out. Woman caught in adultery, let me connect with your pain, your social disgrace. There's no one here to prosecute you, but go and sin no more. I'm validating you as a person and all the circumstances that went into that situation. I want to connect with you and validate who you are as a person in this time of incredible difficulty. And then go and sin no more is the way of making sure that the true message, the truth is followed. But Jesus never really started there. He started with connecting. And a beautiful study is to go through the Gospel of Luke. And each time Jesus and his people came into interacting with a crowd, maybe their crowd coming in contact with another crowd, it seems like every time that happened, Luke always paused to talk about Jesus connecting with an individual. Fascinating. See, we love the crowds at our events, but don't have trouble for the people. Jesus taught the crowds, but connected with the people. I mean, it's funny how we would say we're Jesus followers, but a lot of what we do is the exact opposite of what he did. This is really interesting. So we want to see them maybe for who they're going to be, who they have the potential to be, but let's not tell them who they must be according to our way of thinking at this moment. It's not a good starting place. I find that we are much better able to connect with people when we start with the things we have in common. For example, when we're talking to people about different lifestyle orientations, we can point out all the places we disagree and all the places we can name chapter and verse. But what if we were to start with, you know what, I hear you because I have the same ache in my heart to be loved. And I share that with you. Let's talk about that because we have that in common. It's a different, entirely different way of connecting. Okay. Connecting safely, by definition, the belief it is never okay under any circumstance to treat another person with anything less than utmost respect. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Never okay under any circumstance to treat another person with anything less. Oh, but you don't understand. Well, that needed to be corrected, or that was just a little joke, a little kind of, a little funny story that, no big deal. So what I shared one of their quirks in our dinner party, so it's okay, it's no big deal. Yeah, it is a big deal. This signifies an understanding relationships will never grow beyond a surface level unless both parties feel emotionally safe with each other. And what is required is a commitment from both individuals to take responsibility for their contribution to the relational misses and the ability to clean up those misses as quickly and honestly as possible. That is connecting safely. We talked about in the critical pause. I want to spend some time in that critical pause that we talked about in our 5th week, looking at what I've done to contribute to the miss. I feel I can connect really well with someone who's owning their part of it and not just putting all the blame on me. And then finally, love creatively, by definition, is the joy found in creating new ways to express one's deepest feelings for another person. It signifies the enjoyment of continuing to pursue someone you've already caught. Wow. I believe that if we could adopt this mindset of pursuing someone we've already caught relationally, we would combat one of the greatest risks to our relationships, and that is taking people for granted. It happens to all of us. Over time, we start taking that person for granted. And it's a very small, narrow passageway between taking them for granted and starting to think about what else is out there that would be more exciting. So, word of caution, maybe even a chance to step back and look at how often have I expressed my gratitude? And I hear people say this a lot, so it must be something to it. I'll hear them say, well, I feel it, and I feel that. I'm really grateful. I just haven't told them. I haven't found a time to say that. And I don't understand why you would withhold something so incredibly meaningful. So maybe we can work on that. And the requirement here is an all-out commitment to fight against the natural trend of taking someone special for granted. This is not a comprehensive model, but I believe it has some ways of thinking about communication that could maybe help us get going in the right direction. If we could take one or two of these, what I encourage couples to do is to choose which of the 5 areas you would like to start with. And obviously, it's good to start with listening well. And then just work on that box for like a week or 2. And just practice what it means to listen well. And then move to the next box. And after a while, you've got some really good momentum in how you're connecting because you're communicating well. And pretty soon those problems that we couldn't communicate, that's why we're in this mess. If I'm not going to have my clients come with every problem they have. I'm going to have them come and learn how to communicate about those problems. That way they're not dependent on me. They're learning the tools to be able to do that with each other. So that's our goal and that's our hope. And maybe you'll find something there that you can jump in with and then continue to move forward into becoming a much better communicator, starting with the ability to listen well.